Karen calls 911 because I refuse to give her my house keys. This whole mess started about 6 months ago when my wife and I bought our dream home in what seemed like a nice, quiet suburban neighborhood. The house was perfect, a beautiful colonial with a big yard, updated kitchen, and enough space for our future family. Everything was great until we met our next-door neighbor. The first red flag appeared on moving day. We were barely finished unloading the truck when she came marching over, clipboard in hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she announced, not even introducing herself. "I'm the neighborhood watch coordinator. I'll need a spare key to your house for emergencies." My wife and I exchanged confused looks. I tried to be polite but firm. "Thanks for the welcome, but we're not comfortable giving out spare keys to our home." She blinked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Oh no, you don't understand. I have keys to all the houses on this street. It's for everyone's safety. What if there's a fire or a gas leak?" "Then we'd call emergency services," I replied. "They're trained to handle those situations." She huffed impatiently. "But I'm right next door. I could get here much faster. Plus, what if you lock yourself out? You'll need someone with a spare key." "We appreciate the offer, but we'll make other arrangements if that happens. We're not giving out keys to our house." She stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, she spun on her heel and stormed off without another word. My wife and I laughed it off at the time, thinking that would be the end of it. We were so wrong. Over the next few weeks, she kept finding excuses to bring up the key issue. She'd corner us while we were getting the mail or working in the yard. "You know, the Andersons across the street gave me their key the day they moved in. Such nice, trusting people." Or she'd leave passive-aggressive notes in our mailbox. "Just a reminder that I'm still waiting for your spare key. Better safe than sorry." We kept politely declining, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. Things escalated when she started making up imaginary emergencies to prove her point. One day, she came pounding on our door at 7 a.m. "I thought I smelled gas coming from your house," she exclaimed when I answered. "If I had a key, I could have checked it out while you were sleeping." "There's no gas leak," I said firmly, "and if you actually smelled gas, you should call the gas company, not enter our house yourself." She crossed her arms. "Well, how do you know there's no leak? Are you a gas leak expert?" "Our house is all electric. We don't even have gas service." That shut her up, but only temporarily. A week later, she claimed she saw smoke coming from our chimney. We don't have a fireplace. Then she insisted she heard our carbon monoxide detector going off. We hadn't installed one yet. Each time, she used it as an excuse to lecture us about why she needed a key. The final straw came last weekend. My wife and I were enjoying a quiet Sunday afternoon when we heard someone rattling our front door handle. I looked through the peephole and saw our neighbor actually trying to pick our lock. I yanked the door open, startling her so badly she dropped her tools. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded. "I was just testing your lock security," she stammered. "It's part of my neighborhood watch duties. And I have to say, your locks seem very flimsy. All the more reason you should give me a spare key." "Get off my porch right now," I said through gritted teeth, "or I'm calling the police." "Fine," she snapped. "But don't come crying to me when there's an emergency, and I can't help because you're too paranoid to give me a key." I thought that would finally be the end of her crazy demands. But the very next day, while my wife and I were both at work, all hell broke loose. I was in a meeting when my phone started blowing up with texts from other neighbors. Apparently, our lovely neighbor had called 911, claiming she heard screaming coming from our house and needed emergency access to check on us. She told the dispatcher she was the neighborhood safety coordinator, but the homeowners were being difficult about giving her a key for emergencies. The police and fire department showed up with sirens blaring, expecting to find some kind of hostage situation. Instead, they found an empty house because we were at work, like normal people on a Monday afternoon. One of our more reasonable neighbors filmed the whole thing on her phone and sent it to me. The video showed our neighbor putting on quite a performance for the first responders. "I know I heard screaming," she wailed dramatically. But I couldn't check because they won't give me a key. Someone could be dying in there. The police, to their credit, seemed skeptical. They did a perimeter check of our house and quickly determined there was no emergency. When they asked our neighbor to explain exactly what kind of screaming she heard, she started backpedaling. Well, it might have been the TV. But how can I know for sure without a key to check? That's when things got really interesting. One of the officers asked to see her neighborhood watch coordinator credentials. She hemmed and hawed before admitting she had sort of appointed herself to the position. She also had to confess that no other neighbors had actually given her keys. She'd been lying about that too. The police were not amused about having their time wasted with a false emergency call. They gave her a stern warning about making false reports and told her to leave us alone. I left work early and came home to give a statement to the police. While I was talking to them, she came marching over again. "See?" she shrieked, pointing at me. "He's home early. Obviously something is wrong. This is exactly why I need a key." The officers exchanged looks of disbelief. One of them turned to her and said, "Ma'am, if you don't return to your property right now, we'll have to arrest you for harassment." She finally stormed off, but not before yelling, "I'm just trying to help. Don't come crying to me when you really need emergency access." I thought the police involvement would finally put an end to her key obsession. But the next day, she started going door to door, trying to rally the neighbors against us. She claimed we were endangering the community by not participating in her imaginary key-sharing program. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called a lawyer friend who specializes in civil cases. He helped me put together a cease and desist letter, documenting all her harassment including multiple demands for house keys, attempted breaking and entering when she tried to pick our lock, false police reports, harassment of us and other neighbors, impersonating an official neighborhood watch coordinator. We had the letter professionally served to her. Her reaction was priceless. She actually tried to refuse delivery, screaming that we were harassing her by sending hostile legal documents. But the best part came a few days later. Remember those neighbors who had been texting me updates during the fake emergency? They did some digging and discovered our neighbor had pulled similar stunts in her previous neighborhood. She had been forced to move after getting caught making copies of house keys she was temporarily borrowing. Armed with this new information, we filed for a restraining order. The judge was particularly interested in her history of key-related harassment and the false police report. We were granted a 2-year order requiring her to stay at least 100 feet from us, our house, and our property. She showed up to contest the order, claiming she was just being a concerned neighbor. The judge was not impressed, especially when we played the video of her performance for the police. "Ma'am," the judge said, "you attempted to break into their home, made false reports to emergency services, and have a documented history of similar behavior. This stops now." The restraining order was granted. She's now forbidden from contacting us in any way, coming within 100 feet of our property, making any statements about us to other neighbors, attempting to access our home for any reason, making false reports about our property. To really drive the point home, we installed security cameras covering every entrance to our house. We also sent copies of the restraining order to the local police department and all our immediate neighbors, so everyone knows she has zero authority to enter our property. The cherry on top? The police cited her for making a false emergency report, which came with a hefty fine. She tried to fight it in court, claiming she genuinely believed there was an emergency. The judge asked her to explain exactly what kind of emergency would require a neighbor to have a key instead of calling 911. She couldn't answer. The fine stood. These days she glares at us from behind her curtains, but doesn't dare come near our property. Other neighbors have told us she's still ranting about how unsafe the neighborhood is without her key-holding services, but no one takes her seriously anymore. We've gotten to know our other neighbors much better through all this, and they're lovely people who understand basic boundaries. Several have shared their own stories of her trying to demand their keys, but everyone refused. The whole experience taught us to trust our instincts about maintaining boundaries, even when someone tries to make us feel unreasonable for doing so. No matter how much someone claims they need access to your private property, you have every right to say no. I still can't believe someone would be so entitled as to demand keys to a stranger's house, but at least we got a great story out of it. And hey, all those security cameras we installed have captured some amazing wildlife footage, so there's a silver lining. Just remember, if a neighbor demands your house keys for emergencies, run the other way. And maybe invest in some security cameras while you're at it. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Thanks for all the supportive comments. I've got quite an update to share about what's happened since my original post. Update, 6 months later. You guys aren't going to believe how this all played out. Remember how I mentioned our neighbor was trying to sell her house? Well, that situation exploded in the most spectacular way possible. It turns out she'd been telling potential buyers that she had emergency access to all the houses on the street, presenting it as some kind of special security feature. She even went as far as showing them a ring of keys she claimed were copies of everyone's house keys. This woman was literally using her imaginary neighborhood watch coordinator status as a selling point. We only found this out because a potential buyer's real estate agent got suspicious and started asking other neighbors about this supposed key-sharing program. When they discovered it was completely made up, they reported her to the State Real Estate Commission for fraudulent practices. That triggered an investigation that uncovered she'd been running this scam at 3 different previous addresses, not just the one we knew about. She would move into a neighborhood, demand keys for safety, and then use that false sense of security to inflate her home's value before selling and moving on to the next target. The Real Estate Commission hearing was absolutely wild. She tried to argue that she wasn't technically lying because she intended to get everyone's keys eventually. The commissioner wasn't having any of it. "Ma'am," he said, "you advertised unauthorized access to other people's homes as a selling point. That's not just fraudulent, it's potentially criminal. Remember that restraining order we got? She violated it twice during all this drama. First violation. She sent a certified letter demanding we write a statement confirming her neighborhood watch coordinator status to clear up this misunderstanding with the Real Estate Commission. Yeah, that's not happening. Second violation. When we didn't respond to her letter, she actually showed up at my wife's workplace. She cornered my wife in the parking lot, waving some kind of document and insisting we needed to sign it or she'd expose our conspiracy against her. Security cameras caught the whole thing, and she was arrested on the spot. The judge was not happy to see her again. Turns out, violating a restraining order when you already have a record of breaking and entering attempts is taken pretty seriously. She was sentenced to 30 days in jail. She served 12. A $5,000 fine. Mandatory counseling. GPS monitoring to enforce the restraining order. An additional year added to the original order. But wait, there's more. Remember all those false emergency calls she made? Apparently, she pulled the same stunt with at least 4 other houses in our neighborhood. Each false report cost taxpayers around $2,500 in emergency response resources. The city decided to make an example of her and hit her with a bill for all of them. Now she's facing over $12,000 in emergency response fees, legal fees from multiple court appearances, Real Estate Commission fines, the cost of our restraining order, criminal penalties for the violations. She tried to dodge the fines by claiming bankruptcy, but the judge ruled these were criminal penalties that couldn't be discharged. She's now on a court-ordered payment plan. The best part? All of this came out right as she was trying to close the sale on her house. The buyers obviously backed out when they learned about all the legal drama. No one wants to buy a house from someone who's been caught running real estate scams. Finally, after all this mess, she was forced to sell her house at a massive loss just to cover her legal fees. The new owners are a lovely retired couple who understand basic boundaries and have zero interest in collecting anyone's house keys. But the karma didn't stop there. Remember how she kept insisting she needed keys for emergencies? Well, last month she managed to lock herself out of her new house across town. Instead of calling a locksmith like a normal person, she tried to break in through a window. Her new neighbors, not knowing who she was, called the police. She tried to explain that it was her house, but since she'd only been there a few weeks and hadn't changed her address on her ID, the police didn't believe her. They arrested her for attempted breaking and entering. She had to sit in jail for several hours until her son could come verify her identity and bring proof that she lived there. The responding officers ran her name and discovered her history of key-related incidents. One of them actually knew about our case and called to let us know about her latest misadventure. He said she was ranting about how this never would have happened if people would just share their keys like they're supposed to. Some people never learn. As for us, we're doing great. The security cameras we installed have actually helped catch a couple of real porch pirates, so that's been a nice bonus. Our other neighbors are still wonderful, and we regularly get together for cookouts, no keys required. Several people have reached out asking how to handle similar situations in their own neighborhoods. My advice is simple. Trust your instincts, document everything, and never be afraid to get the authorities involved when someone crosses the line. No one has the right to demand access to your home, no matter what excuse they give. Final update. Her son called us last week asking if we'd consider dropping the restraining order since she's learned her lesson. Based on her latest breaking and entering incident, we respectfully declined. The GPS monitoring ankle bracelet looks lovely on her though. Edit 2. Thanks for all the awards. To those asking, yes, this is all documented in police and court records. Sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction. Edit 3. Holy cow, this has gotten even more attention than the original post. For those asking about a legal defense fund, we're fine, but consider donating to your local domestic violence shelters. They help lots of people dealing with stalking and harassment get restraining orders who might not otherwise be able to afford them. The next one is titled, Abusive. Ex refused to move out, so I did it for her in the most inconvenient way possible. I was inspired to share this after reading the top post today. I had broken up with my ex about a year prior to this event, but she wouldn't move out, one excuse after another for a solid year, until one day, amidst yet another argument, she finally admitted her plan was to stay indefinitely, and threatened to claim domestic abuse if I did anything about it. That weekend she decided to go out for one of her weekend vacations with a girlfriend, so I took advantage of the 48 hours I had and got to work reserving a storage unit and rented a moving truck. I worked around the clock loading that truck multiple times, only sleeping a few hours that entire weekend. She had hoarding tendencies that I had long turned a blind eye to, had to pick my battles, and it had gotten pretty far out of control. Not only did I make dozens of trips, but the storage unit itself was almost too small for it all. It was truly amazing how much crap she had managed to pack floor to ceiling in multiple rooms, closets, and the garage, despite living in the same house together for so long. I made sure her laptop was the very first thing in the storage unit all the way in the back corner, followed by all of her clothes, so many fucking clothes, then furniture, then all the meaningless hoarded junk. By the time I was done, that storage unit was packed floor to ceiling to the point I had to really Tetris the last couple of loads in there just to get the door shut. She was right at the end of a semester of school, and not only needed the laptop first thing the next week, she was also planning on leaving for a cross-state road trip to visit family, and everything she needed for that was at the very back. From what I heard, it took her and a friend the better part of the week to find that laptop and repack the storage unit. She missed some important deadlines at school and delayed her family trip by a whole week, which messed up other plans and wasted a few PTO days at work to boot. The best part came months later. You see, when she first came back from that little weekend vacation, I had asked her to sign a receipt to receive the key to the storage unit. She immediately refused, threw a fit, tried to steal my dog, failed, tried breaking into my house while I was gone, then came back hours later with about 6 cops in her wake. To this day, I don't know what lies she told them to get that entourage, but after I explained my side of the story, they realized it was just a civil matter and quickly left. The receipt I asked her to sign was simple enough in that I offered to pay for the storage unit for 6 months if she signed it that day. But since she didn't, I removed my card from the account and put the unit in her name. Only problem was, the card she then put on file with them was an authorized user card linked to my account, which I promptly canceled. So then she missed enough payments on the storage unit that they locked her out and she was never able to get the rest of her stuff before they presumably auctioned it all off.